So good evening. Welcome to St. Jerome's University and the St. Jerome's Lectures in Catholic Experience. My name is Scott Klein. It is truly good to see you. And for those of you milling around in the foyer, please come on in. Sort of late arriving crowds. We were joking earlier that Catholic crowds tend to be a bit on the late side. And actually, I mentioned that to our speaker this evening. And he said, that, when he was teaching over in Fredericton, that he actually had his class do a study comparing Catholics arriving at church and Baptists. I'll have him tell you the conclusion of that study, but it's alarming. Get out of the way of the Baptists. The Catholics are very polite on the way to church. It's opposite on the way home. It's very interesting. Anyway, it is truly good to see you this evening. I'm kind of wondering whether Barack Obama said the same thing to McCain tonight, but we'll see when we get home. I really do appreciate you coming out this evening. It was a beautiful day. It's been a beautiful fall so far. I think we can all pray that that continues. So welcome to St. Jerome's. You are always home when you come. Tonight I would like to start off with an introduction. I'm one of the people who coordinates the center. You've seen my picture pop up here a couple of times. I want to introduce you to one of our newest members at St. Jerome's University, Dr. Joanne Benham-Rennick. Joanne is joining us this year, and she will be one of the coordinators, so we have co-coordinators this year. And I'd like to invite Joanne to come to the lectern and say a few words of welcome.
It's a pleasure for me to be able to be here with you, and I'm delighted that you are also here with us. And I welcome you to this series of lectures this year, and I hope that you will enjoy them. And we'll start you off with a very good one tonight, and I look forward to getting to know you all better as the series progresses.
That was Joanne's humble introduction to herself. Joanne's actually a graduate of the University of Waterloo. She was our first Ph.D. student in religious studies. Some of you will find her work fascinating. She studies chaplains in the Canadian military. So she has a new book that will be coming out and all sorts of interesting things. So I think you will find her a wonderful lecture coordinator, and we'll come up with some very exciting lectures over the next couple of years. Tonight we mark a special occasion, the launch of a new Center for Responsible Citizenship. As many of you know, last year we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the St. Jerome's Center for Catholic Experience. This year we're turning a corner and beginning to present a new expanded version of this center. The lecture series will remain the same. You'll see some things that will change, and probably a bit more activity going on. You'll see some more students and those kinds of things. I know a number of you have come to lectures over the years thinking, my goodness, this is a university. Where are all the students? Right? Well, we're going to try to introduce you to some of our students who are doing wonderful things around the world, some of whom you're seeing on the slides before you. So look forward to that initiative over the next little while. To talk a little bit more about the center and the launch of the center, I'd like to invite Dr. Miroslav Tatarin, our Dean at St. Jerome's and Vice President, to introduce the center in some length, to tell you about the exciting things that are happening at St. Jerome's, and also to introduce our guest speaker this evening, the Honourable Noël Kinsella, the Speaker of the Senate of Canada. So, Dr. Miroslav Tatarin.
Thank you very much, Scott, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last year, as Scott remarked, marked a milestone in the history of St. Jerome's University and this St. Jerome's Center for Catholic Experience. For 25 years, this center has been St. Jerome's flagship outreach to the wider community. It has served to help broaden St. Jerome's educational mission to hundreds, if not thousands, of people. But the Center for Catholic Experience has not just served you out there. It has been a constant reminder to us at St. Jerome's that a Catholic institution of higher learning has a responsibility to be engaged with the broader community, with the church at large. So over those 25 years, this lecture series has not only helped you grow, but it has challenged and fostered St. Jerome's to grow. Over those 2.5 decades, one of the most central themes which has consistently resounded has been that of the Church's teaching on social justice. Our North American position of privilege should not be a reason for us to breathe a sigh of relief and say, thank God I wasn't born in Rwanda or Somalia. Rather, that social teaching calls us to recognize our privilege and utilize it to make ourselves more open and able to engage with others, sharing with them our common humanity. This sense of commitment to others, to a common humanity, and to be agents of transformation in the world, if not agents of the kingdom, has imbued this lecture series and called St. Jerome's University to see its academic mission in ever more challenging and holistic ways. It was as a result of that vision that 4 years ago our own Dr. Scott Klein took charge of a new initiative at St. Jerome's, what is now the Beyond Borders program. Through Beyond Borders, students participate in an extensive and rigorous academic preparation for a 3-month period of international living and working. Living and working not in a hotel, not in a resort, but living and working in a marginalized community. Sharing the lives of others. Living the vision of the 25 years of the Catholic Center. Those students for the past 3 summers have lived and worked in South and Central America, Eastern Europe, Africa, Asia. In addition, a few students have been so moved by their experiences that they have committed to an additional 3-month international internship through a federally funded program called Students for Development. But this recognition of the living mission of St. Jerome's University is not confined to a few students who are daring enough to venture onto international placements. For 2 years now, during our orientation week, which is a very hectic and tiring week for our students, hundreds of students during that week on Friday, at the very end of that vigorously tiring week, are willing to give up half a day of their week for community service. And those same students have come back to us and said, we want to do more. In our courses, our faculty are increasingly recognizing the benefits of senior practicums during which students can put their in-class reflections into action which is changing our communities. The vision for our Master of Catholic Thought program arose in many ways out of this very lecture series and its commitment to the broader public. The extremely successful MCT program provides concentrated theological study for those who are already involved in leadership positions in Catholic institutions. The spirit of this lecture series has helped energize and transform the spirit and vision thriving at St. Jerome's. It's for this reason, and for many others like this, that this evening we look forward to the fast-approaching 150th anniversary of St. Jerome's in 2015 and proudly announce the launch of the St. Jerome's Center for Responsible Citizenship. The historic lecture series in which you've participated over the years, all the initiatives I've mentioned, and others, will now be incorporated, supported, and directed under the auspices of this new designation and structure. All the aforementioned activities will continue, but there will be more. The St. Jerome's Lectures in Catholic Experience will continue, but there will also be mini-courses, occasional workshops. We also hope eventually to be able to host lectures or workshops in other locales, partnering with parishes, retreat centers, or just interested communities to bring your experience to many, many others. We're designing an optional volunteer program for our students called Beyond You, so that increasingly our students will recognize the connection between the theoretical vision which they're honing in the classroom and the practical realization of that vision in their communities. We're expanding the number of courses with service learning as an integral component of the course. We're also increasing our capacity to support our faculty who are engaged in research that has clear practical implications for our communities. This year, 2 of our history professors, Professors Lachenbauer and Toohey, have received prestigious Canadian International Council fellowships because of the value of their research for the development of Canadian government policy. St. Jerome's is particularly proud of them because those 2 gentlemen have received 2 of the only 8 such fellowships awarded across Canada. If you read the Toronto Star, today you probably came across an article about the Canadian Health Conference of Ontario, during which, again, our own professor, well known to you, David Seljak, spoke on the implications of religious diversity in Ontario on the development of healthcare policy. David is now a much sought-after researcher and consultant in the area of policy development relating to Canadian religious diversity. Another example of how research at St. Jerome's is having an impact on society. And God help us, thankfully, nobody is having him tell jokes. If you haven't experienced David's jokes, don't bother. I could continue with many more examples. Many of St. Jerome's professors are making an impact on our communities because of their very critical and timely research. They too are living the mission of St. Jerome's and will benefit from this new Center for Responsible Citizenship. But the greatest benefit, I'm certain, will not be for a particular group or constituency. It will be, I dare say, for all of us, for all those with whom we will engage, both locally and globally, for all those who will be moved to support and develop this vision of St. Jerome's University, which in the words of our mission statement is committed to learning and academic excellence, the gospel values of truth, love, justice, and the formation of leaders for the service of the community and the church. I know that you and many others will be very excited by this new development, by this new phase in the life of St. Jerome's and the St. Jerome's Center. But this evening, I'm particularly honored and proud to welcome and recognize among us the Speaker of the Senate of Canada, the Honourable Senator Noël Kinsella, who has been a generous advisor as we move to conceptualize this Centre for Responsible Citizenship. The Honourable Senator has journeyed with us over the past few months and encouraged and supported us. I dare say it was his enthusiasm about our initiatives at St. Jerome's which helped affirm the direction we were considering. We will be counting on his advice in the future. It's a warning to him. We're most grateful for that and extremely thankful that he's able to join us this evening. Senator Kinsella's most distinguished biography began in St. John, New Brunswick. He completed his high school there before leaving for his undergraduate education at the University College of Dublin, where he studied psychology and indirectly, apparently, philosophy, but had to do it. Then he continued east to Rome, where he completed 2 licentiates and 2 doctorates at 2 prestigious Catholic universities, the Angelicum, that is the University of St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Lateran University. Completing degrees in theology, he also completed his psychology degrees and is a registered member of the College of Psychologists of New Brunswick. Dr. Kinsella taught at St. Thomas University in Fredericton for over 40 years and has honorary doctorates from many universities. He served for 22 years as the chairperson of the New Brunswick Human Rights Commission and is highly esteemed nationally and internationally as a human rights advocate. In 1990, he was deservedly appointed to the Senate of Canada, and since 2006 has served as the Speaker of that chamber. Senator Kinsella recognizes the value of educating our young people in a spirit of responsible citizenship. And this afternoon, he generously spoke to a gathering of our students on that very topic. This evening, as we launch the St. Jerome's Center for Responsible Citizenship and inaugurate a new season of lectures in Catholic experience, we're most fortunate to welcome the Honourable Senator Noël Kinsella, who will address us on the topic of serving the common good, ethics-based civics education, and public service. Senator Kinsella.
Thank you very much, Dean, Mr. President. And let me also, as you would want me to do, single out the tremendous work that Scott and now Joanne are doing. You know, I once met a couple of months ago one of my former students, and they said, "Well, Dr. Kinsella, you're now the Speaker of the Senate of Canada. Don't let that word speaker go to your head, because really people really don't want to hear you speak." Then he reminded me he got D on his final mark. You know, in democracies such as Canada, the shaping and functioning of our communities, our society, our system of governance is the work of many hands. And I wish to congratulate St. Jerome's University and the academic community here in Waterloo for your contribution, so impressively illustrated by the work that your students are doing. But more particularly this evening, I wish to underscore the present initiative that you've taken to establish the St. Jerome's Center for Responsible Citizenship, and also your master's degree program in public service. Reflecting the mission of this center, I've chosen as the title for this evening's lecture, as was indicated, Serving the Common Good, Ethics-Based Civic Education and Public Service. The central focus of tonight's lecture is the importance and value of public service. The basis and several dimensions of this importance can be demonstrated through an exploration of linkages among the common good, its pursuit through public service, and the social foundations of ethics. The potential role of civic education as both a direct support for ethical public service and a contributor to the social foundation of this activity will also warrant attention. Given that this lecture is taking place in an institution dedicated to scholarship and critical thinking and is being presented to an audience of scholars and thinkers, I hope that I can do more than merely articulate feelings that I believe we all share. I want, to the extent possible in the time available, to try and show that these feelings reflect conclusions that can be demonstrated by reasoned argument. Most importantly, public service is not just an occupation. It is a vocation, indeed a very noble calling, a calling to do good. And I wish to submit that the public service needs to be understood as a deeply ethical activity directed to maintaining the social foundations that, among other things, make ethical activity possible, as well as serving the more immediate objectives of public service work. I would like to begin my reflection this evening by inviting you to imagine an island, a desolate, deserted island somewheres, and imagine that on that island is a single person, and our solitary islander mounts the highest peak on the atoll and holds up his pencil and cries, "This is my property. I have a right to property." Well, just imagine that scene. I would suggest that the incongruous character and the apparent pointlessness of one person making a claim of right when that person is in isolation. Can the whole notion of right itself make any sense at all if you're the only one there? And so I'm trying to suggest through that illustration that the conceptualization of right requires at least a dyad. That is, right by essential definition is a social reality or social phenomenon, and that people constitute the material cause of human rights. This, of course, is a very Aristotelian argument. In Book 1 of The Politics of Aristotle, he argues that the city comes into being for the sake of living, that is, self-sufficiency, but that, quote, it exists for the sake of the good life, end quote. With this claim, Aristotle is not associating society with mere comfort or convenience, but arguing that it enables human beings to fulfill their telos by living lives of virtue, resulting in happiness. This is the basis for Aristotle's famous claim that life in the city is therefore necessary for anyone who wishes to be completely human. The quality that distinguishes human beings from beasts and the gods, the uniquely human character of human beings, is profoundly rooted in participation in social relationships and in citizenship. If one was to continue with the Aristotelian four causes model of analysis, the formal cause of human rights would include such elements as the immediacy of equality, whereas the efficient cause of right would be law. However, and this is what I wish to underscore, the final cause of human rights, as for law itself, is the common good. Now, the language of common good seems to be directly implicit in Aristotle's account of the importance of cities and what it means to be fully and completely human. It is instructive to review the definition of law that was promoted by St. Thomas Aquinas, which makes explicit the Aristotelian implication of a relationship between human beings, human law, the common good, and immutable ethical standards. Students of philosophy and law will recall that St. Thomas defined law as the ordinance of right reason promulgated by legitimate authority for or directed to the common good. Aquinas also distinguishes four main kinds of law: the eternal, and then three additional kinds which depend in different ways on the eternal: the natural, the human, and the divine. St. Thomas describes law as a certain rule and measure of acts whereby man is induced to act or is restrained from acting. And law has, and this is important, law has an inherent connection to reason, because reason is the essential reference point and measure for human actions. This connection is to both divine reason, reflected in divine law, and secondly, to human reason, when it acts in accordance with the purpose or final cause implanted in it by God. Law is directed by its nature to the good, and especially to the universal or common good. It is addressed not primarily to private persons, but to the whole people, meeting in common, or to persons who have charge of the community as a whole. There is thus, in the thought of Aquinas, an explicit recognition of the relationship implicit in Aristotle's thought between ethics, or the universal and common good, law as its efficient cause, and citizenship, or the coming together of human beings in a community founded upon reciprocal relationships. The common good for St. Thomas is that for which human society exists. It's not merely the sum total of individual goods, but rather qualitatively the good of society, which in turn exists to facilitate the ultimate end of the human person. Now, Mr. President, my motive in exploring these ideas is primarily a practitioner's interest in getting a perspective on the terrain of practice and public service in particular. Let us consider for a moment the relevance of the concept of public interest within the context of the analysis that I have suggested a moment ago. The notion of a public interest, which emerged in the utilitarian discourse of the 19th century, is often seen as hostile to the older tradition of discourse about a common good. And there is little doubt that it was conceived by the utilitarians themselves as a radical departure from tradition. In the mind of Jeremy Bentham, for example, the concept of utility and the idea that the alternative courses of actions available to individuals could be evaluated by means of a calculation involving the summing of their respective utilities, or net contributions to happiness, was seen as a revolution in thinking, dispensing entirely with the metaphysical heritage of Aristotle and the medievals. Now, while I wish to argue that the originality of utilitarianism was probably overstated by its proponents, I do not wish to dismiss the importance of its impact on the public sector and the practice of public service. The view that utility provided the appropriate basis for decision-making and that utilities could be calculated and added together opened the door to the belief that decision-making about public ends should emerge from a process of summing individual utilities or interests in order to obtain a public interest. And this view of public decision-making, in combination with the assumption that each individual is the best judge of his or her own interests, leads us directly to the model of electoral democracy that is now so central to our public life in Canada these days. And elections are only the most dramatic manifestations of a model of public decision-making that operates continuously in all the public polling, consultation exercises, and other forms of public pulse-taking that drive decision-making in modern democratic systems. So, to be fair to the utilitarians, utilitarianism has made a contribution that we see acted out these days. But my argument, however, is that it did not displace the linkages utilitarianism established in the thought of Aristotle and St. Thomas, and certainly did not alter the role of the concept of the common good as an ultimate reference point for public discourse and action. In practice, individuals considering their personal advantage and communities attempting to determine a public interest are driven continuously into the realm of ethical debate, the realm of discussion about what is good and what is not. This is because human happiness, which utilitarians saw as an ultimate reference point, cannot be detached from its consequential relationship with human virtue. The achievement of sustainable happiness for communities as for individuals depends upon the recognition of and adherence to ethical standards, faithfulness to the good. And this, as we have seen, is one of the linkages recognized by Aristotle and St. Thomas between virtue and happiness. And when we acknowledge that linkage, we have no option but to restore ethics to the place it occupied in the thinking of St. Thomas, at the center of any decision about what to do or what not to do. And the common good, by extension, must be seen as central to any deliberation concerning a course of action to be taken by or for a community. This brings me to the conclusion of my philosophical argument, or if you prefer, the threshold of my practical claim. I believe that we can only recognize the importance of public service and indeed fully understand what it is in the context of the central linkages implicit in the thought of Aristotle and so effectively elucidated by the angelic doctor. It is my submission that to render public service is to serve both the public interest and the common good. If, as I have just argued, the public interest needs to be understood essentially as a process for determining the public good, rather than as a decision-making criterion entirely distinct from it, then the objective of serving the common good can be a beacon for us, whether we are probing the philosophical common good or the applied political public interest. In either sense, public service is a profoundly ethical activity, not merely serving an immediate ethical objective, but contributing to the maintenance of the community itself. And if, as Aristotle claimed, we need to be citizens or members of a community in order to be fully human, then public service is an activity par excellence by which we achieve our own full humanity. These linkages lend, I believe, a valuable dimension to a claim with which we are all familiar, that public service is a noble calling. It is noble not merely in the sense that those who serve the public in whatever capacity sometimes forgo material benefits associated with the private sector. It is noble and ennobling because it involves a participation in the essential human enterprise, the continuous challenge of becoming and remaining fully human. Only by rising to this challenge can we avoid the fatality that even Aristotle recognized, and that we see documented in so many heart-wrenching stories in our history books and the daily news. The ever-present danger of reverting to the life of the beast that remains with us all, as suggested by some of the social contract theorists. We live in a culture that compulsively views people through the lens of their occupation, what they do for a living, and tends to conceptualize public service as an occupation. When public service is understood in the richer way that is suggested to us by the ideas we've been exploring, however, it should be clear that it is much more than an occupation, although it is undoubtedly performed by many civil servants, among others. I'd like to suggest that we might consider three categories of public service. First, there is what I might call the representative public service, which includes all those who serve the public on our municipal councils, school boards, the provincial and federal legislatures, as well as public office holders, including members of the judiciary. Those who are running for public office these days to serve in our House of Commons are indeed those who I'm thinking of in this first category of public service, those in elected office. But a second category of persons serving the public is that encompassed by the professional civil service, such as the public administrators at the municipal level and the public servants who are in the provincial or federal public service. This group is engaged as nonpartisan public administrators and might well include professional workers in the fields of health, education, justice. But then there's a third category of public service, very important, that I want to identify. And this third category of public service in this conceptual taxonomy includes all those who render service to the public through participation in service groups, worker groups, church, and other non-governmental organizations. Here we are speaking of public service through active citizenship in civil society, examples of which we saw on the screen in the introduction. This category would include as well individuals who undertake singular actions for the purpose of contributing to the common good, such as the famous run of Terry Fox to raise funds for the purpose of cancer research. But the unifying feature of all these occupations and activities is, of course, that they are not merely directed to the interest of the individual engaged upon them, but are contributions to the public interest and the common good. Within the framework developed in this reflection, they may be recognized as deeply ethical activities sustaining the existence of a community and possibly of ethical activity, as well as contributing to the achievement of more specific objectives. The willingness of citizens to engage in public service thus becomes vitally important for any community. It is argued that a robust public service attitude among the people of a country is critically important among other reasons, for the success of that society's democracy. You know, the Canadian story over the past 140 years, when examined against the norm of democracy and human rights, as we're able to suggest in our seminar with the students this afternoon, you know, that history, when looked at from that standpoint as Canadians, is not too bad, notwithstanding some serious faults along the way. And I had mentioned one thinks of the Komagata-Maru or the St. Louis or the Quebec Padlock or the internment of Japanese Canadians. However, by and large, the Canadian journey has been positive, leading to the conclusion that maybe, just maybe, there's a few things correct about our system. A significant contributor to the success of Canada's democratic development has been the positive role played by Canadians through their engagement in public service. Whether as an active member of civil society, a professional public servant, or as a legislative representative. You know, the Public Service Commission of Canada is celebrating this year its 100th anniversary. And an informative current publication, which has just become available in English under the title Defending a Contested Idea, Merit and the Public Service Commission of Canada, 1908-2008, by Luc Gillier and Ken Rasmussen, provides a good account of the Commission's story. This work is a follow-up on the well-known work of Professor Ted Hodgetts and his colleagues, A Biography of an Institution, the Civil Service Commission of Canada, 1908-1967, which traced the emergence of the modern merit-based public service out of the patronage-ridden organization that preceded it. This book documents the impact of several extraordinary individuals, including Commissioner Adam Short, whose efforts between 1908 and 1917 as a member of the newly created Civil Service Commission significantly contributed to the establishment of the modern public service. Stories like these exemplify the idea of public service, including the ethical dimension, which I have been arguing is central to this idea. In my opinion, part of the explanation for the success achieved over the years by the Public Service Commission of Canada and its equivalents in the provinces across Canada is that they have been able to attract bright and highly motivated citizens to pursue a career in the field of public administration. And one attracting element was the fundamental role played by the merit principle across the civil service or civil services in Canada. As Hodges had said, quote, "Over the years and still today, as we attempt to ensure competent and efficient management of public resources, provide equality of opportunities in public employment, and ensure a proper balance between preventing patronage and ensuring the public services responsiveness to elected officials, the principle of merit remains a key part of our debates on the future of the public service," end quote. Now, while there have been those over the past who felt that the professional public service did not respect the merit principle, in fact, there is little evidence that such a perception was a significant factor in causing some Canadians to turn away from a career in a given civil service, whether it be municipal, provincial, or federal. Indeed, as we see in the example of Adam Short, deficiencies in the application of the merit principle are not so much a deterrent as a call to action for the true public servant, a call to redouble efforts to remedy any ethical deficiency. If one were to canvass the question of whether or not there has been a diminishing of interest in or participation in public service in all of the three categories of public service that I've mentioned, one might look at the state of social capital or social connectedness or social cohesion. This is because these concepts re-express in current social science language a conception of community and the linkages that are critical to its health that is traceable to Aristotle and St. Thomas. The Senate of Canada's Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology examined the issue of social cohesion and published its 1999 report entitled final report on social cohesion. This report, the third released by the committee in the course of its 2-year study of the impact of globalization and technology on social cohesion in Canada, provides an extensive exploration of the interrelationship between society and economy and argues fundamentally that economic progress cannot be sustained if its social prerequisites are allowed to erode as a result of the pressures of globalization and technological change. Now, this phrase, this term, social cohesion, in this argument refers to these social prerequisites, or in the words of the distinctive Canadian definition included in the report, quote, the ongoing process of developing a community of shared values, shared challenges, and equal opportunities within Canada based on a sense of trust, hope, and reciprocity among Canadians, end quote. Of central relevance to our theme here this evening, this committee study found that social cohesion can never be taken for granted, even in a country such as ours, such as Canada, with its deep historical roots. The health of communities as community is continuously affected by the entire universe of economic, social, and political influences, and in our time is subject to a range of new pressures linked to globalization and technological change. From the perspective of our concerns here this evening, dimensions of this challenge that were not explored in the committee report are more clearly discernible. The implications of the challenge extends far beyond our future material prosperity. It also potentially affects the commitment to public service and the possibility of ethical action itself, via the linkages that we have already explored. For this reason, one cannot overstate the importance of the committee's call for effective policy responses to globalization and technological change. Professor Robert Putnam, of Harvard's, formerly of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, provided another early expression of concern about the current state of social cohesion and social connectedness and its implications for a robust public service attitude. In his year 2000 widely circulated book, Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of American Community, Putnam develops a number of important insights. For example, he argues that television has had a negative impact on public service in the community involvement sense. He says that, quote, it is precisely those Americans most marked by this dependence on televised entertainment who are most likely to have dropped out of civic and social life, end quote. It's noteworthy that Putnam concluded his study on technology and mass media without deciding whether television was the cause of this marked detachment or the result of a previous step away from the public square. Putnam recognizes that distinguishing between causes and consequences in the realm of all human affairs is enormously complex, which serves to underline the difficulty of the policy challenges associated with these problems. A further interesting observation of Putnam is that civic skills can be learned in the church environment. He writes in his work called A Pluribus Unum, there's a passage, he says, quote, faith communities in which people worship together are arguably the single most important repository of social capital in America, end quote. I wonder whether the same could be posited for those of us who study together in the academic community. A final consideration from Professor Putnam's work is that dealing with ethnic diversity. In his work, A Pluribus Unum, Diversity and Community in the 21st Century, he reports on his research in 41 metropolitan areas in the United States, and that, quote, in ethnically diverse neighborhoods, residents of all races tend to hunker down. Trust, even in one's own race, is lower, altruism and community cooperation rarer, and friends fewer, end quote. I obviously, and I know some of the professors here would like to get into a good analysis of the work of Putnam's thought, but that would require another seminar in another place. But for our purposes, it provides a comprehensive examination of the challenges of social cohesion in modern societies, including, as just noted, trust issues that seem to arise within groups because of the proximity of others. But Putnam is equally comprehensive in his attention to policy solutions, including the central importance of civic education and the diversity of sources, including religious institutions, that can be effective in providing it. I'd also like to draw your attention to an important contribution made by the Jesuit Father David Hollenbach in his work, The Common Good in Christian Ethics, who in the year 2002 provided a thoughtful analysis of the common good in relation to the globalized world of today, where people must move towards new forms of solidarity if they are to live good lives together. I've already mentioned one Senate of Canada committee study that is relevant to our theme this evening, but I can't neglect to mention at least one additional one, and I can hardly claim to be without bias about the second one since I was chairing the committee that undertook it. The study completed by the Senate Standing Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology was looking at Canadian citizenship. And it argued that the essential character of Canadian citizenship cannot be reduced to a single identity, but rather is found in the fact that Canada enables people to identify with their country from different perspectives and with different emphasis on what is most valued. Of particular relevance to the analysis that we're developing here this evening, this report argues that citizenship entails a commitment to a wider realm beyond that of self-interest with associated responsibilities. Citizenship education was affirmed to be of central importance in providing all members of the community with the information, motivation, and skills that are needed for full participation, and the committee called on the federal government to work with the provinces in order to address a situation of widespread neglect. In light of the concerns about social cohesion that were to arise in the decade following the 1993 report, and the themes that we've been preoccupying ourselves this evening with, the insights of the Social Affairs Committee 15 years ago remain amazingly timely. We can only hope that, reinforced by developments in Canada during the intervening years, they become a prelude to more effective action. It's my position that citizenship education may well be the conditio sine qua non of a robust public service attitude. Its importance in addressing social cohesion, social connectedness, identity, and democracy is recognized by a number of contemporary policy specialists. Professor Alan Sears, a colleague in the education faculty at the University of New Brunswick, for example, has observed that Canadian citizenship education in the Canada of the 21st century goes in the direction of a generic citizenship education, that is, an approach that gives focus to rights, social justice, and participation, rather than on a particular Canadian vision of democracy and citizenship. To quote, "The emphasis on the latter model is on a blend of what Kirwan calls moral, legal, and participatory conceptions of citizenship education, with a focus on preparing young people to engage in civic activity in a range of ways, from volunteering and community service through more formal political actions such as voting, campaigning, or running for office." It is interesting that the approach to citizenship education advocated by Professor Sears is, in important respects, reflective of the conception of citizenship developed in the Senate report on citizenship. And the inclusive understanding of participation expressed in the quotation I've just shared is aligned with the equally inclusive conception of public service that I am suggesting this evening. So in this argument that I'm advancing, ethics grounded in reason and expressed in the conception of the public good is the central focus, in my view, of public service. Before concluding, I would like to suggest that the language of the Government of Canada's current Public Service Code of Values and Ethics is congruent with this view and provides an excellent source of practical guidance to public servants, both those working for the federal government and those in other categories of public service that I delineated. Reflecting its immediate practical purposes, the federal code devotes significant attention to the elaboration of a conflict of interest regime and post-employment behavior requirements. However, in its section on public service values, it includes ethical values along with three other categories: democratic, professional, and people's values. The ethical values include a direct affirmation of the duty to make decisions in the public interest and to ensure that the public interest prevails over the private interests of any public servant. The other categories provide additional emphasis on the importance of ethical public service, including the need to help ministers under the law to serve the public interest and the need to respect human dignity and the value of every person in exercising public service authorities. At the beginning of my talk this evening, I indicated that the linkages among the common good, its pursuit through public service, and the social foundations of ethics would provide a philosophical framework for exploring the character, central meaning, and vital importance of public service. As discussion has proceeded through a series of conceptual and practical issues considered, I've tried to underline a central theme. And that central theme is that public service is a noble and profoundly ennobling activity. And as Aristotle and St. Thomas recognized so long ago, its ethical dimension is the key to the enormous satisfaction that public service can provide to those who commit themselves to it in either or any of the three categories of public service that we've delineated. In our country, in Canada, we are supremely fortunate to have benefited from the work of so many who have made the commitment to public service over the long history of our community and its development. I'm confident that this will continue, and I would like to conclude with the experiences I've been fortunate to have in my own life very much in mind by urging all here this evening, and particularly the students, that they can enrich their lives and enrich our common life by, and in your individual ways, taking up the challenge of public service. It's an experience and a contribution that you will make, and it's also an experience you will never regret. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker has agreed to take some questions. I actually asked the Speaker if he was fine handling his questions, and I thought, oh my gosh, well, what does he do for a living? I mean, boy, that was a very smart move on my part. But Mr. Speaker will handle the questions. And again, please make your way to the microphones.
Senator Kinsella, I enjoyed your speech very much. Seems to be the week for senators to be in town. Michael Kirby was here on Wednesday night addressing mental health issues, which he's devoted a lot of time to. I think the biggest challenge we have is the growing complexity of the world. And it's increasingly too much for our politicians and those who are involved in organizations generally. At the same time, we have a bubble of people who are retired, who don't know what to do, particularly those who are workaholics. And we have young people who have the time before they start their families to get involved. So there needs to be more opportunities for people to get involved in defining the problems that are threatening our very existence and then creatively coming up with solutions. And so we need some social innovation here. It's sort of a form of participatory democracy, if you like, but it's fine to use those words. How do you make them meaningful and practical?
Thank you very much for your questions. In the midst of a national federal election, I have so many biases. I have a very special bias, but I guess this is not the audience in which to express my particular bias. But I can say I visited the campaign headquarters of three of my colleagues in this great area of Ontario. Down in Nova Scotia, a well-known politician there not too long ago expressed a very negative concept about candidates of a certain mature age even seeking public office. And the minister responsible for seniors, she jumped right on him and said, there's Section 15 of our Charter of Rights and Freedoms says that everyone is equal before and under the law, and without discrimination. That includes without discrimination by virtue of chronological age. And as you were raising your question, look at the resource that's there, the experience that's there. It would make absolutely no sense at all not to close off that resource in terms of the good of a community. I'm happy to say that we've moved we're moving more and more away from mandatory retirement and more in the direction of personal choice retirement. And mandatory retirement was based on a model or a paradigm that was a myth created by Bismarck. So we learn and we change, and that's the good thing, I believe, is that we are prepared to learn and change. And in terms of have we found, like in Aristotle's day, of course, they had the city-state, and everybody would gather and make their community decisions. In the complexity of the world we live in today, but isn't it amazing how, and I know both in the United States and Canada, where two federal elections are underway, the use of the web, the use of the internet, everybody's using it now. I mean, Facebooks and these things are. There is more communication that's occurring. So in a sense, maybe that technology, we just have to go a few more steps forward to increase the kind of participation that I think that you are suggesting, and I share with your suggestion. No society, as the great philosophers taught us, you can't step twice into the same spot as in the river, right? And the river keeps going. So in many ways, we have to recognize that the paradigms of the past are not adequate for today, and we need to be open to change them. And we just bring this back to the center. This is a real good example of why this initiative here at the university is so important and so good, because we're now going to study this, and we're going to study public service within an ethical context and within the context of the good and public good. And it is interdisciplinary by nature, and if my talk this evening sounded a little bit interdisciplinary, because it was. And I think this is the exciting thing about a center like the one on civic responsibility and public service and, at this university, drawing from all the different faculties, all the different disciplines, is cutting edge, and again, I salute you for it. Excuse me.
Thank you so much for this evening. It's been stimulating and interesting. I was intrigued by your notion of 3 different levels of public service, and wondering if there was any possibility of including intentional parenting in that third group of public service. People who puts their own immediate agendas aside to care for the youngest in our society and teach them some of these things about sharing and thinking of other people. Do you think parents fit there?
Well, I mean, there's no question that parenting is critical for growth and development, no matter what the species is. But in our, the human endeavor, I mean, this is why in our faith tradition, the family is such the core unit of society, and that we understand in our tradition the principle of subsidiarity, and that parenting as a phenomenon from a social scientist perspective is not only the rearing of children, but the rearing of, the caring for, the husbandry of. In fact, I don't know whether the linguist can make a relationship between that word, the husbandry of the environment, and husbandry within the familial sense, but also the mothering, the parenting. A society of care is going to be a very successful society, in my opinion. But as Putnam says, but we can't be out there bowling alone. Parenting, by its definition, I mean, daughter, son makes no sense without mother, father, right? One requires the other. I mean, so a caring relationship obviously requires the caring person, the person providing care, and the one who is cared for or is being helped, which once again underscores the social nature of the human enterprise, the social nature of law, the social nature of right, the social nature of ethic.
Good evening, Mr. Speaker. I teach grade 10 students civics, and my biggest challenge is to encourage them to vote when they turn 18. And as many of us know, 78% of young people between the ages of 18 and 25 do not vote. And when you speak to the young people and you say, why aren't you interested? They say, because politics is corrupt. Yeah. Almost as if that will make them cleaner by accusing the politicians. You also have that old phrase, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. And in our current our current election, we've had a number of candidates that have had to resign because of questionable backgrounds. I'm painting a bad picture here. But you also have so many situations where people go into public service, and once in public service, do a lot of unethical things, especially in the financial areas. Can we reconcile your message tonight with what seems to be a reality?
Yeah, look, thank you very much. That's an excellent question. And I suppose from one possible theological analysis could be, well, that explains the consequences of the Great Fall. As I'd mentioned, some of the social contract theorists thought that, fundamentally we are wolves, it's all against all, and the natural state of humankind is to be again and beat up in each other. Some of the things we read in the newspapers and see on TV, maybe the social contract theorists had it right. However, all the people in this room who do, and I had the chance to speak with some this evening, who do heroic public service in the voluntary sector in civil society, are the ones who provide the cement and the foundation of the wonderful democratic and open society that we have in Canada, with all of its problems. But let me say this to you. If I could leave this message, and if the grade 10 students and others, and I know the statistics as well, very, very low voter turnout among that age group, 36, 37% sometimes, that our Westminster system of governance started before, but as Canada, started on July the 1st, 1867. By way of a footnote, on the 2nd of July, 1867, a debate broke out on how to reform the Senate. I'm happy to report to you the debate is going on alive and well. But for 140 years, we've had this system of governance, and a lot of problems along the way. But our Westminster system of parliamentary democracy is based on political parties. The engine room, the foundation stone of our system of governance that has been so successful in terms of freedom and democracy. Political parties are a good thing, but there are those in the media and others who will, and those in the media should know better. Others speak from ignorance, in the culpable sense of ignorance. Political parties are a good thing, and we need to encourage and praise those citizens who participate to do the good in the political process by joining political parties. My view is that is a good thing. Are there bad apples? There are bad apples here in the church. I mean, we've had horrible scandals in many elements of the church's activities. That doesn't mean the church is bad. The church is not bad. We've had some misguided individuals, clergy and others, but the church is fundamentally good. It is critically good. Its objective is the good. Well, so also public life, public service, is to do the good. Why do we do the good? Why do we work to make our society as best as we can make it? So that our people can be happy. Not in the immediate hedonistical sense of being happy, but being happy to be fulfilled as a human person. And for those of us in our faith tradition, the ultimate objective of our happiness is the beatitude, is ultimate happiness. So, our theology, in my opinion, is sound on this, and all of these social activities are critically important. The danger is that this myth has been allowed to become widespread, and people say exactly what you said your students in grade 10 say, and that's a shame. And that could be a danger for our freedom if it's allowed to go unchallenged. I would suggest to you that we say to our children and our grandchildren and anyone and our students that it is a good thing to be reflective of our system of governance. It is a good thing to vote. It's an important thing to vote. I would hope we would not go the way of many other countries who pass laws and say you will be fined $100 or whatever if you don't vote. I mean, I think the act of will needs to be as respected as the act of reason. And if I just may use this as an opportunity, Dean, just to make this point, I think one of the, and I was going to say early, but my goodness, time passes. Pope Benedict XVI, his speech at the University of Regensburg, which got him into a lot of trouble because people misread it. And he has many times in his speech when he came to the United States, and his speech in France, focusing on the importance of reason. I mean, we must dialogue using reason. And it's almost putting out to the academic community a high challenge to become critical in the epistemological sense, not in the mundane sense, but to use our reason, to probe, to analyze, to discern. I mean, this is what the Holy Father was talking about. And so, this is why, again, your center in an institution that reason is on a pedestal, as one hopes. The distinguished president, as he deals with faculty and students, sometimes he wonders about. But both reason and choice is so terribly important. I'll just tell you one little private story. I went to Rome, and this is shortly after Benedict became the Pope. He was elected in the spring. I was there in the fall, and the nuncio to Canada wanted me as speaker to meet the Holy Father, but he was just coming down from Castel Gandolfo. I was quite delighted. He says, "Well, we'll arrange. We can't arrange a private audience in the apartments, but we'll arrange you to meet with him." So I had my private audience in front of 40,000 people in St. Peter's Square. We were sitting up near him on his Wednesday audience in the square, and he came over after the ceremony was all over, and they introduced them to me. So if you ever see this German Monsignor who's always over his shoulder, he's whispering in the Pope's ear, like, "Who's this?" etc. And he's really good. And so when the Pope comes over, he says, "President Kinsella, Canada," in English. So I spoke to him in Italian. I said, "Santa Padre, I said, I don't mean to speak Italian, but I said, the people of Canada really understood your lecture in Regensburg. He grabbed me by both hands. He wanted to hear. And I said, we've been building a metropolitan multicultural society. Consequently, we are a multi-confessional society. And it was only by reason and the use of reason that we've been able to dialogue with everybody. And multiculturalism is doing very, very well as a national policy in our country. And he was very interested. And I can't tell you that I introduced him to my wife, and he went down the line. This man came over and he said, "What were you and the Holy Father talking to for so long?" So I told him. And the next day in the Observatore Romano, this big article, Speaker of the Canadian Senate says Canadians express solidarity with Pope's speech in Regensburg. So I got a nasty letter from your former president, Michael.
Thank you very much, Senator Kinsella. Just a pondering question, a question that I struggle with, and that's if I think back to my university days, I mean that was still the day when people saw public service in the civil service as an honorable goal. And I think we all have to recognize that that's changed. The new phase, I would say, in the student experience really is an engagement with public service, but of the third type that you talked about, i.e. NGOs. But what about the civil service? How can we get that energy, that excitement about working in NGOs, public service, to also recognize the value and need for the civil service?
Well, look, this is why what you're doing at this university is so intuitive, is so important, because unless you agree with René Descartes that we are born with certain innate ideas, a public service attitude has to be learned. And where are we going to learn it if not in an academic environment? So your center, and if we get more centers like this across Canada, well, I haven't done a detailed study, so I'll get myself into trouble anyways. I mean, how many courses in political science talks about the public service? I do know that in courses in public administration, they deal with the technology of public administration. But the ethical dimension, why this calling? And I chose this word vocation. Why this calling, noble calling? Because what you're doing there is that, yes, we talk in terms of the public interest, and we can distinguish between public interest and a lot of the public interest today is determined by polling data and all of that. But we understand that the ultimate goal of society is the common good, which is a qualitatively different thing. And it's all about good, to do the good. And therefore, why ought one consider public service in either of the three senses? It is to do good. And so it's simply a question, I think, of casting out that old paradigm of thought, which is there. Whether or not people like Putnam or Father Hullenbach or others are right about there's been, whether because of television or whatever reason, as we all walk around with our BlackBerry, a certain breakdown in social engagement and social connectedness. But I think this phenomenon about hesitating of a public service as a calling predates this. So I would suggest that that it's probably more that we have not been reflecting on the value of doing good. You know, whether you're in an NGO, whether it be the Kiwanis Club or the Rotary Club or child care or whatever, without a good philosophy of the good, I mean, how many social workers who do just tremendous work in just heart-wrenching circumstances, they'll burn out within 6 months if they don't have a good philosophy of life. How can you possibly be dealing with tragic human stories day in and day out as a professional social worker and carry on? Well, The good ones do it because they had had an opportunity to develop a good philosophy of the value of human life. And that's why they're doing it. They're doing it for the good. They don't see the evil. They don't see the mangled family, or they don't see the battered child. They see the good. They see this child who has potential. They see a dysfunctional family, maybe economic elements, and maybe drugs, and maybe alcohol. They don't see that. The good social worker sees this valuable person, and those who reflect from a theological perspective reflect it in terms of Imago Dei or any of the other theological frame of reference that one might use. Good. Thank you.
As the senator was making a reference about the BlackBerry, I was afraid mine was going to go off. So I'm just going to have to apologize for that. But to offer a final thank you to our speaker this evening, I would like to invite Dr. David Perrin, our President and Vice Chancellor at St. Jerome's, to come forward.
Thank you very much, Scott, for animating this evening, and congratulations on the launch of our new Center for Responsible Citizenship. As you've headed up this project in these last months and this last year, it's been a pleasure working with you and also exploring that concept with the Vice President, Dr. Miroslav Tatarin, and as well Senator Kinsella. We've had a number of conversations this past year that I've appreciated to help deepen and strengthen the conceptual framework behind the center that we celebrate tonight. So you've done a marvelous job, and I'd like to congratulate you and just offer you a round of applause. Also to welcome to the center Joanne. Thank you so very much for assuming co-directorship of the center with Scott, and I know you'll be facilitating and animating these gatherings pretty well from here on in, I understand. So you're picking up a very healthy and vibrant activity at St. Jerome's University, and certainly thank you very much for being with us and accepting that responsibility. But I'd like to take the next few moments to express the gratitude of St. Jerome's University for the Honourable Noël Kinsella to be with us this evening. You've challenged us in so many different ways, and you've brought to light some very, very significant questions, not only in relationship to our faith life as believers, as faith-based community members, but also citizens of our grand country, Canada. You've challenged us along so many lines, and rarely do we hear wisdom being brought forward not only from our contemporary society and the experience of our modern world, but reaching back 800 years to Aquinas and indeed 2,400 years to Aristotle. That in itself is a feat, and I must say, a welcome one. You've helped us understand in bringing this wisdom forward that we just don't occupy our lives, that busyness is not enough. We seek as human beings to live profound lives. We seek to live the depth of our life. The human spirit is challenged in ways to bring forth the common good. And so you've helped us understand that the expression of right relationship is always being in relationship, and relationship is linked to happiness. You've helped us understand that we are not meant to live alone, but how do we live together? How does the common good relate to the individual good? And conversely, what is useful is not always ethical, but conversely as well, what is ethical may not be useful. And so the tension lies between these various poles. Aristotle and Aquinas remind us of much the same: the public interest, the common good. You've told us that the relationship between these two is citizenship, the full development of our humanity. Our occupation is not enough. Our busyness is not enough. A busy life often ends up in despair. It ends up in fatigue. It ends up in really not knowing where we are going as individuals, nor as a society, nor as a church. And so the challenge is always active citizenship, active relationship, because relationship in itself, as I said, is not adequate, as Dr. Kinsella has reminded us this night. The democratic change that we seek depends on active democracy. You've helped us be aware of our corporate responsibility in seeking these goals and that machine that occupies our lives. Do we need to turn off our TVs more? The very media that contributes most significantly to shape our political thoughts, the television, removes us from politics. That is what you have reminded us of this evening, and what wonderful wisdom that is. The intrusion of politics into our lives removes us from politics. That is the active participation in communal deliberation and the responsibilities that go with it. Dr. Kinsella, you've reminded us that public service is indeed a rewarding life, as your own life is a witness. The incredible contribution that you've made to the people of Canada through your many years of active academic work and through the democratic process and political life in the Senate, we thank you for that contribution. Thank you for being at St. Jerome's, and thank you for such a wonderful presentation.
So I have just a few short announcements, and we will be finished with the evening. First announcement is that the Social Justice Committee of the University Catholic Community is selling fairly traded coffee and tea in the foyer, so stop by there. If you would like information about the lecture series and about the center itself, I would encourage you to go to the desk and sign up. We also have an email sign-up list for up-to-date information. I would like to point out that you do have some envelopes in your chairs. These lectures are free. However, if you do feel the urge to give, it is a free will donation, and you can put money into the envelopes and drop it off at the desk with Carol. You will be tax receipted on any amount over $10. For bigger gifts, talk to the president, I suppose. He'll be happy to chat with you. Just a couple of event reminders. October 17th, Ada Maria Isazi Diaz from Drew University will be here speaking about justice in the 21st century. For those of you who do not know Ada, she is a wonderful Mohirista theologian, comes out of the liberation tradition, and will be here to talk about Latina women in Cuba and New York City. Fascinating work that she is doing. So I would like to thank a few people who made this event happen. Carol and Ivan Person, who are faithful. This marks Carol's 10th year at the center and is the driving force for all of the lectures. Her work is remarkable. I'd actually encourage you to join me in thanking Carol. I would also like to thank the people who are going to be staffing the center. One of the things that we've done at St. Jerome's is that we've come up with wonderful ideas. We have a lot of energy behind this. The students are encouraged. But without the staff support, this would absolutely go nowhere at all. These are the people you don't see. Donna Wright, who is at the front desk, is a part of this. Elise Redden is also a part of this initiative, and helping direct the daily activity of the center, Andrea Charette. So they are doing a wonderful job as well. They're here tonight, so please join me in thanking them. Of course, I would like to thank Dr. Kinsella and his thoughtful talk, and I think more than that, his incredible service to this country. I am not a Canadian. I'm an American. And it makes me so proud that this country, which is becoming my own, has leaders like Dr. Kinsella who have given himself to his students at STU and to the common good in Ottawa. This is unbelievable to me, and it really does make me proud, as I'm sure it does you. So thank you very much, Dr. Kinsella.